Let's talk about graded comic books for a little bit. We're going to look at it in a couple of different ways. Who's grading your books? And how has the current comic market potentially impacted CGC? Let's take a look at this next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hey there, comic book community. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. And before we get started, like, comment, subscribe, do all that great stuff. I really appreciate it. Follow us on the other socials, Instagram, Bronzeville_comics, YouTube. This is YouTube, and whatnot. Bronzeville_comics. We do sales every Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And if you use the link in the description below, if you're not yet on Whatnot, you'll get $10 off your first purchase, regardless of who the seller is. Also, in the description of this video is a link to my email and my eBay store and a link to the website for King Con 4 coming up March 25th and 26th in Island, New Jersey. You're going to see so many comic book people there, especially if you follow YouTube and Instagram. Just going to be a blast. If you have not yet been one of the first 3 King Cons and you're in the area and you're free, make it your business to get there for one of the 2 days. It is a 2-day show for the first time this year. I want to talk about CGC grading, and I'm going to talk about it in like 3 different veins. Number 1, how has the comic market impacted the number of submissions? I don't know. I'm not sure how many books have been submitted to CGC recently, let's say in the last 5 months, as opposed to a year or a year and a half ago. Certainly titles fluctuate, and they have their ups and downs. But overall, how many books are coming into CGC? So as we all know, if you have been following the CGC story, in 2021, I guess it was, CGC started to get really backlogged and their turnaround times started to suffer. Largely because you have to go back to 2020 and the beginning of the pandemic when people were kind of stuck at home and they had the opportunity, because they couldn't leave the house, to go through their own house and find things in their attic and their basement and learn that they had value. In addition to that, during the pandemic, we had stimulus money, which gave people more money to spend on comics. They weren't spending money on things like going out to dinner, going to the movies, because those things weren't happening, on vacations. So there was more free money to spend on comic books. And I think also there's probably a psychological component of it too, is facing uncertainty. People look back at the past with nostalgia and looked at things that they were fond of in their childhood, including comic books and other collectibles. So we had the comic boom. And the comic boom was really probably from early 2021 into early 2022. And what we've seen in the last year is the market correcting itself and values of comic books coming down steeply. So, but CGC hired more people to get through the grading, and their turnaround times, which were very backlogged, have decreased and become much quicker, especially for modern books. So it leads to a couple of questions. The other thing is, as the value of comic books has decreased, so I put books aside in boxes for me to clean and press and submit to CGC, which is another part of the financial aspect for CGC. Is they have CCS, which is an affiliate company that does cleaning and pressing for them. So fewer books to CCS, fewer books to CGC, less money for CGC. And so what happened is, I'm digging through books now. I have kind of a threshold of, let's say, $150 to $200, unless I think the book has the possibility of increase in the future, or it's a book I want for my personal collection. That I'm going to kind of hold to that. So for economy books pre-75, I'm kind of like, I want it to be worth, when I think the grade I think it's going to come back in to be worth at least $200 or more. There's a little wiggle room if it comes down a grade or two lower and get down into the higher 100s, that's still okay. For modern books, which I would not be fast tracking, maybe about $150. And again, I can come down a little bit on that. But what's happening is a book that was worth $225 a year ago is now worth maybe $125 in some cases. So I'm going through books and they are no longer worth getting graded, even though the condition, my anticipated CGC grade on those books is the same. Books that maybe a 9.0 would be worth getting graded, now maybe a 9.6 or 9.8. And I look at the book, well, it doesn't quite meet that threshold. I thought maybe it was a 9.0, 9.2. Boom, that gets put to the side. It's going to be sold raw or kept in the PC raw. It doesn't make sense for people to send books in. So the overall volume of back issues that people would be sending in is decreasing. Now, CGC could be making up by that by having more books pass through the pre-screen at 9.6 or 9.8. But still, if you don't think it's going to be a 9.6 or a 9.8 and that it's going to have value at that, you're not submitting it to CGC. So I imagine in the overall scheme of things, if you look at back issue books, that there are fewer books that for many collectors and dealers would meet the threshold to be submitted. And a lot of books really kind of went bananas where, 9.2s were selling for $200 and now a 9.8 is $180 and a 9.2 is $75. So, those books aren't worth being submitted. Now, books that have been in the system, economy books especially, for months and months, there's no way to get them back. And as they're sitting, and if you've seen some of my unboxings, especially for modern books like a ASM 361, for instance, some of those early Carnage books, you'll see that the value is not worth it, when they come back a year later. So I'm wondering if CGC, and if anybody knows or has found resources to see the number of CGC submissions or the number of books that they grade per month. Obviously, the census is a great resource, but it's a voluminous resource, and it's hard to determine how many books are getting graded across the board in a particular month. Has that number decreased? If it's my supposition, but I don't have hard evidence to that fact. Now, obviously, newer books, fresh off the shelves, incentive covers, variants, acetates, CGC is probably getting a large portion of those. But again, does it make sense for all those books? As we're seeing, books like Amazing Spider-Man 55, the Gleason Webhead variants, those were hot for a couple of months when they first came out, and people who got the 9.8s early on, great, and then the value decreased. So the market for those new variants is very short-lived, and it's if you have that book and you're going to submit it and get it back 3 months after it came out on shelves, it's probably not going to have the same value and might not be worth getting graded. So that's part of the conversation. The other thing, too, is on high-end books. If the values come down on the books that they get 3% of fair market value for, that's less money. 3% of 50,000 is a lot less than 3% of 100,000. So CGC, now owned by private equity, they want to maximize profits. They hired all these new people, and these new hires required training, which cost them money. It's not just like somebody comes in and it doesn't work out after a couple of weeks and you let them go and you just have 2 weeks worth of pay. No, it took probably some time to train them, in which the employees are getting paid but are not processing books, which is a net loss to the company. Which leads me to another question. Are the books being graded to the same standard that they were in the past? Because dealers, buyers, sellers, the comic book community has long relied on CGC to be the arbiter of grading. Back in the old days, and if they're raw books and I think it's near mint and you think it's very fine minus, we're not going to be able to come to a deal. But if it's a CGC graded book, there's a little less arguing, or a little less personal opinion in what the grade of the book is. So if it comes back graded a 9.4, it's a 9.4. The seller knows, the buyer knows. But should not all 9.4s or 9.8s be the same? If the grading standards are more stringent now, and a lot of people are supposing that based on books that they have submitted, that CGC's gotten tougher with their grades, then is a 9.8 that was encapsulated 4 years ago worth a 9, should have the same value as a 9.8 that was encapsulated this month? If that supposition is true, then the 9.8 that was encapsulated this month is potentially a better copy than the one that was encapsulated 4 years ago. Should that be the case, or should CGC be consistent and train their employees to be consistent with the standards that they've set up? Now, that being said, if they want to change the standards for newly published books, so any books that come out, let's say, now, that are released in February of 2013, we're going to apply, going forward, we're going to apply stricter standards to those books. That's fine, because all books of that particular issue that are graded all meet the same standards. We know that there's a lot more going on in the cleaning and pressing aspect of the hobby, including conservation techniques, whitening techniques that maybe it seems as though CGC is not catching on to. And that's a whole other argument of the hobby that can be had. That's not what this video is about, but people are able to take books and make them present better, at least for the short run. Now, the long run, who knows? I mean, the fact of the matter is, I get a new slab, right? One of my recent videos, right? Look at this crystal clear case, right? No scuffs, no scratches. But what will the plastic that is around this book look like 10, 20 years from now? Okay? It looks beautiful right now, but will it, like old polyethylene bags, become cloudy over time? And will the book still look as nice in that CGC case as it does today? Another little question that I have. But we all know that there are plenty of collectors out there who will buy graded books that are older encapsulations that they believe are not cleaned or pressed, and be able to get a grade bump on them. Good for them. You know, I appreciate taking a collectible and presenting, make it look better, making it look nicer, cleaning it up. I wish I could clean up my room here. I will. I'm on vacation this week. That might be happening. I've cleaned up 1 or 2 rooms in the house so far, but that's just an aside. Now, here's my other aspect of it. What about the people who are grading your comic books? And what I want you to think about is jobs that you have had. Okay? I think back to an office job that I had after I graduated from college, before I decided to become a teacher. I worked in an office. And the sitcom that has that name is not far off reality. You get a cross-section of the population. You get people who are fastidious and professional, and you get people who it's surprising that they have a job. Right? So who is grading your comic books? Right? They said that they were starting employees at $15 an hour. That's not a lot of money. That's not a career. So who's jumping at those things? And the other thing we know that many industries are having difficulty attracting employees and attracting quality employees. So who's working for CGC? And I kind of have in my mind that it is the cast of The Office is working at CGC. What's happening to your books if the Office cast is grading them? There's a lot of variability. Somebody will send in a 9.8 pre-screen of 25 books and get back 3 books graded 9.8. A seasoned collector with a trained eye will send in another batch of 25 books from like the same era of comic and get 25 back in a 9.8. So obviously there's a lot of variability in the people who are working there. So, for instance, if Angela is grading your books, I think you're in for a tough time. I think Angela is going to be very fastidious, and she's going to go through those books completely and make sure that if it's going to get a 9.8, it truly is at least a 9.8. I think you're in trouble there. What if Creed's grading your books? I have no idea. Will Creed even grade books? I mean, like, how many books a day does Creed grade? And how closely does he really look at them? Now, what if Kevin's grading your books? I think if Kevin's grading your books, the book that you pressed perfectly to a 9.8, that the covers were as smooth as a baby's bottom, they definitely have finger bends. That's what's going to come back in your grader's notes. Kevin's books will have finger bends, and you're lucky if they don't have fingerprints or stains on them after Kevin's done with them. Dwight? Who knows? It all depends. Some days, he's going to be completely by the book and go, nope, 9.2, 9.0, and perfect looking books. Then other days, he's going to be distracted, and he's just going to process 9.8s. Okay? Stanley? Is Stanley grading your books? What do you expect from him? I'm not sure. I think he's going to look at the first couple books, and especially like if you submit multiple books from the same era, the same issue number, he's going to look at the first book, go, oh, that's a 9.4, and they'll all be 9.4s. I think that's possible. Right? What if Andy's grading your books? I think you want Andy to grade your books because Andy wants to be a people pleaser. And he wants people to be happy with his work. And he say, look, all these 9.8s that I submitted. I think Andy's the guy you want grading your books. Because Andy's going to give your books good grades. Okay? Jim? I think Jim's going to be fair. I think Jim is going to look at the books. He's going to be a professional. He's going to examine them professionally and give them a proper grade. Probably the same thing with Pam. But remember, all of this could be overseen by Michael Scott. And then what? There's an office meeting at the end of the day. And then your books just sit there, put aside. Who knows how they're going to be graded? Or even worse, D'Angelo's in charge. What happens then? I think we all are probably aware that there's a great deal of variability in CGC grading. And you have to remember that unlike... If you're watching this video, I am going to make an assumption that you have some passion for the hobby, and you have a comic book in front of you. If you're going to submit it for grading, you care about that book, right? Now, on our own books, we may get a little rose-colored glasses and think that they're better than they actually are. But in reality, I enjoy the books that I have, and I'm going to be fair about them. And I'm going to spend the time not only pressing and cleaning them, but looking them over, right? It's not just a job, right? It's 4:30 on Friday afternoon. Is there a difference? It's 9:30 on a Monday morning after a rough weekend. How does that affect how your books are graded? Who knows? It depends on the personality of the person grading. I think we have to be realistic as to understand. And leave comments below. Have you ever worked in something that looks like The Office? Think about your coworkers, right? Think about your coworkers on any job that you've ever had, and then think of them as CGC employees. It's a little bit of a crapshoot. So, anyway, let me know what you think about those summaries about who's grading your books. I think you want Andy. You don't want Angela. And you definitely don't want Kevin. Because God knows what's going to happen to that book. So, anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. What experience do you have in recently getting books back from CGC? My most recent batch I thought was a little harsh because the grades were all a little bit lower than I had anticipated for the most part. Usually I kind of dance around. Some are higher, some are lower, and most are right where I predicted. I think 5 were above, 11 were below, and 9 were what I thought. So that's not terrible in terms of a submission. And that's why I like to try to keep track of what I think the grades are going to be so I can test my own grading. But we all have sometimes where you look at it and go, what? How did that happen? We know what had happened. People are human, and the employees at CGC, I'm sure, are more than fallible. So, again, leave your comments below. What do you think about the current state of CGC grading? Are they getting as many submissions as they used to? And are we still in a learning curve for the new graders? So anyway, we can take a look at a couple of my other recent videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.